Sugar is the worst thing you could possibly eat in your diet if you were lied to about sugar. My name is Brian. I've been in the health and wellness world now for 20 years. I've been coaching prometabolic health and nutrition for nearly 10. And today, we're going to talk about sugar. When it comes to modern day understandings about health and nutrition, we oftentimes create momentum around an idea. And one of those ideas that has a ton of momentum behind it is the idea that sugar is problematic, that sugar is bad for you. And the truth is, there's not a lot of evidence to support it. A lot of the ideas around sugar causing inflammation, sugar causing diabetes, sugar causing Alzheimer's, all these different problems that sugar supposedly causes, when you look at a lot of the research around that, that research is very myopic. It's very single factor focused on the sugar level and not so much the context. Not so much what else is going on in the brain, what else is going on in the body, what else is going on in the environment of that person. And when you see biomarkers like your fasting blood sugar levels or your hemoglobin A1C, and these numbers are really erratic and they're all over the place, it's very tempting to say sugar's the problem. Sugar is the issue, we need to remove it. But the real question that should be asked, that doesn't get asked enough, is why am I not using sugar well? And so when we think in terms of basic physiology, your brain's preferred fuel source is sugar. It's the number one thing your brain wants to run on. And your brain controls everything. Your brain controls your heart rate. Your brain controls your breathing. Your brain controls your movement. Your brain controls your emotions, your mood, your focus, your ability to progress and move through a skill. Your brain controls every single aspect of your life and who you are. How well your brain functions depends on how well it's utilizing sugar. So when we're thinking about it from a prometabolic standpoint, our goal is always going to come back to how do we optimize how well you're creating energy? How well are we providing energy for the tissues that need it, the organ systems that need it? And when it comes to the nervous system, it needs a lot of sugar. So we are always going to look at that and say, are we creating an optimal state for our body and brain to function in? And if we look at sugar and we say sugar is that main fuel source, then the big question we need to ask is what can we do to make sure that we're actually using it well? So when we see on blood work that we have markers that say we're not using sugar well, that's a context problem. We need to figure out how do we address this context that we're in so that we use sugar well. We don't want to remove the fuel source that our system wants. We want to remove all the things that are impeding us from using that fuel source. So when we look at things like junk food, people will say, oh, I'm going to cut out my sweets. My blood sugar numbers were high, so I'm going to cut out my sweets until I go to the doctor next time. When you look at the foods they cut out, generally speaking, it's things like pastries and cakes and candy bars and things that are more than just sugar. And furthermore, you can go into, well, what nutrients am I potentially missing in my diet that influence how well I use sugar? There's a lot of cofactors for getting sugar from the blood into the cell so that your cells can actually use it to create the energy they need to stay healthy and keep you young. If those cofactors are missing, if those vitamins, those minerals are missing, if the other foods that are full of other things that don't have nutrition in them, if those are making up the bulk of your diet, it's very common to have blood sugar issues. But we don't want to look at that as saying, oh, blood sugar is the problem, let's just lower blood sugar. If we looked at that and said the same thing with cholesterol, oh, cholesterol is the problem, let's just lower your cholesterol. For the sake of changing this number on the test, we're not actually making you healthier. We're not actually making you function better necessarily. What's often happening is we're treating that biomarker like the target. And the moment the biomarker becomes the target to fix, it ceases to serve its purpose as a biomarker. Okay? So if I see somebody's blood work and their blood sugar is high, they've got it through the roof, hemoglobin A1C is high, the first question I'm always going to ask is, why aren't you using sugar well? What can we look at in your food, in your lifestyle, in your training, in your supplementation that's not actually helping you or potentially holding you back? What is missing or what's holding you back? And then we can start to address how well you use sugar. So sugar is really just a term that denotes the size of the carbohydrate molecule. It's either going to be a short molecule, i.e. a sugar, or a long chain molecule, i.e. a starch. So when you have that kind of breakdown, when you have that differentiation between a disaccharide, meaning two single sugar molecules, or a polysaccharide, meaning long chain sugar molecule, eventually they all break down into the same thing regardless of the size they start with. And that thing is glucose, is your blood sugar. So when we're looking at it and saying sugar is bad but starch is okay, that doesn't tell us anything helpful about what food choices we should lean towards. Now when it comes to choosing sugar over a starch, that's oftentimes one of those arenas we want to lean into. We want to question that. We want to explore that to see how we respond. Because oftentimes the food sources that have sugar in them, things like fruit, honey, maple syrup, milk, the foods themselves full of other nutrition. Not only are they full of other really good nutrition, like in the case of milk, you've got a lot of protein, a lot of potassium, a lot of magnesium. You've got a lot of good stuff in dairy. When it comes to fruit, you've got a lot of potassium, a lot of vitamin C, a lot of really important stuff for keeping your blood sugar under control. A lot of anti-cancer compounds in fruit. Well, when you say sugar's bad, you eliminate those as food sources. You're now eliminating the opportunity to give your cells the availability of those nutrients that come with it that can actually help you. So if I eliminate sugar, but say grains are okay, starches are okay because they're not sugar, eventually I'm still going to raise my blood sugar. But the problem is now I have this long, complex molecule of carbohydrate. It will go through my intestinal tract a lot longer before it's fully broken down. And that opens the door to the ability for my bacteria in my gut to actually ferment that carbohydrate molecule and create toxic things in the gut. That's right. Not all the bacteria in your gut are good for you. And not all of them need to be fed. And the more you feed them these long chains of starches, these long chains of glucose, the more they can make a compound called endotoxin. Endotoxin is a fancy way of saying it's a toxin produced inside of you. Okay? And it usually implies or indicates a compound called lipopolysaccharide, which we'll get into another time. But when you have a presence of lipopolysaccharide constantly being produced in the gut because your main source of carbohydrates is starches, you're opening the door to a lot of global systemic problems in your body. And that's where a lot of times people will have real, true health issues. Not only that, endotoxin in the gut can actually lead to all of those problems people typically mention. Inflammation, not caused by sugar, caused by endotoxin. Alzheimer's, links to endotoxin. Diabetes, links to endotoxin. So a lot of the things that people will blame sugar for are more than likely caused by other stuff. And when you look at those research studies through the eye of what is sugar causing these problems, though sugar is high and elevated in these conditions, well, maybe it's because endotoxin is making my cells less good, less healthy, less capable at using sugar. So when I see sugar high, that doesn't mean that's the problem. It means it's a byproduct of the circumstance in which that problem shows up. So if we think of sugar through that lens, the question needs to become, oh, well, not how do I get my sugar lower, but how do I actually improve how I get my sugar to be used the way it's supposed to? And if it's not being used well now, how do I find out why it's not being used? You want to think differently about these problems. And the biggest thing that you can learn in your pro-metabolic quest is to figure out, how do I solve problems? How do I look at these symptoms and solve these problems? And as you go down that road and as you get better and better and better at understanding how these things work and how your body works with them, you start to shift your mindset away from, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and address this biomarker. You're now looking at it as, this is data, this is a clue, and I have tools to address that. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this clarified some things for you. Stick around because I got plenty more like this coming your way. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with anybody who needs to hear it, and I will see you soon. Take care.